what makes someone remarkable? Do you mind being described as the white people whisperer? What is the optimal age to get married?
That year was the first year that we ever heard a teacher talk about race.
Is the college application process fair?
You start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Is there like a cartoonist community? So many times when we go live with these things, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boom.
Welcome to the Non-Obvious Book Review. I am your host, Rohit Bhargava, and I have Dr. Emmanuel Probst with me, who is the author of a brand new book called Assemblage. That is the correct way to pronounce it. It is a French word, and I'm so thrilled to have him here. He's a brand expert, a global lead in thought leadership for Ipsos, which is a huge company that we're going to talk about, and just a fantastic person, a marketing expert. I've known him for a very, very long time. Welcome to you, my friend.
Rohit, thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you for the opportunity to connect with you and your community today.
You are very welcome. And I absolutely loved this book. It is a great, great book for anyone who works in marketing, anyone who's a leader, and we're going to dig right into it. But the first question I'm going to ask you is, what makes Assemblage non-obvious?
Yeah, what makes Assemblage non-obvious is this perspective from consumer psychology. Let me articulate for you. Most marketing books start from the standpoint of a brand strategist. Here we take a big step back and we put ourselves in the shoes of people, not even consumers, people. And we want to understand, what are people trying to achieve? We know that people are overwhelmed with brands. And starting from this perspective of consumer psychology, the book guides you through this art and science of create brands that are going to transform people and the world they live in.
Now, there is a drab American pronunciation for your title, but that's not what we're going with. We're going with the French pronunciation, but the title itself is kind of an interesting choice. And I know there's a fascinating story behind it. So share the story of why you chose to title the book Assemblage.
Yeah, assemblage or assemblage is inspired from the way we make cognac, or the way we make whiskey or bourbon or a great wine. What this means is, when you create a bourbon, you pick and choose from dozens, possibly hundreds of different brandies. And you're going to pick different flavors and different aging processes from different barrels and so on and so forth. And you will do so to create a product that is unique and differentiated and on brand, that aligns with your brand values and your brand image. So assemblage is a metaphor to say that when creating brands and to create strong brands, we can and we should also apply this same process of picking and choosing what is going to create the right brand.
In your experience, you've worked with hundreds of brands. I believe that's not an exaggeration. This seems like a very strategic and intentional way of thinking about a brand. Like, in your experience, are most brand marketers thinking this strategically about how to relay their brand in the world?
I heard two important words, Rohit. You said strategic and intentional. Strategic, because that's how we build a brand, in contrast to the tactic. Meaning, too often these days, brand strategists are obsessed with lower funnel metrics, with conversion today and tomorrow. And that's good, that's important, but that's not how you build a brand. A brand strategy is 2 to 5 years. How are we going to create a territory for the brand? How are we going to earn white space in the marketplace? And you also mentioned the word intentional. And this word is so central to the book, and in my opinion, so central with how we should build brands today. An intention is a co-creation process with the audience. Let me contrast intentions and expectations. Consumers might have expectations. Expectations are do me, if you will. That is, I expect the product is going to work well, it's a good price, and also it's reliable, right? So that's an expectation. An intention is this co-creation process between the brand and the audience. How are we going to evolve the brand? What we want the brand to stand for? What we want the product to stand for? How can this brand and this product make a positive impact on me, the individual, but also the world around me? So I think that's a major transformation. That's a major shift for marketers, for advertisers, for brand strategists, is to understand that you no longer control the narrative. You are going to guide this brand narrative and co-create this brand narrative with your audience.
So what happens when you're co-creating the brand narrative and the audience comes up with something you don't like or you don't agree with?
Yeah, you course correct, if you will. That is, you establish the foundations of what the brand stands for. You course correct when people don't necessarily interpret these brand values the way they could. You also know that the news cycle is forgiving. And what I mean by this is if someone says something not good about your brand this morning on social media, well, that's a blip on the radar. It's not going to detract to all the great, important work you've been doing over the last few months, over the last few years to build your brand. So you have to accept this. There is a part that you cannot control. There is a little bit of risk. But again, what's most important is what does your brand stand for, how it's going to make a positive impact on people and the world we live in, what you intend to achieve. And that's the strong foundation that you should care for and you should care about, not so much a curse word on social media this morning or yesterday morning.
Yeah, it's good advice. I mean, brands and the people working for them often do tend to overreact to whatever was posted on Twitter this morning, for example. I know that there are two sides oftentimes to branding conversations, where one is we need to build the brand in order to generate the loyalty and have people kind of know what we sell before they actually encounter it. And then there's the other side of marketing, which is it's all about conversions. We need to have the numbers and the analytics. Building a brand is nice, but we just want to sell our stuff. So when you encounter that sort of perception gap between the sell the stuff and convert and only do marketing that is direct and sells versus the person who says, well, we need to build the brand so that people know it. And even if we don't sell anything, the long-term brand value of building the brand is worth it. How do you get those two sides to sort of meet in the middle?
Okay, here's the dirty secret on why people obsess with lower funnel metrics, with sales and with results. And I will say it out loud. It's because number one, those metrics are so easy to understand. You can train any college student in 2 hours on click-through rates and conversion rates and all those good metrics you get from Google and the likes. Number two is because most people are goal-setted on sales and care about moving products this quarter, possibly this month, possibly this week, possibly today. And last but not least is that in my experience, a vast majority of marketing professionals, no matter what level they are at, they don't necessarily intend to stay in their role, let alone with the brand they're with, for any longer than maybe 2 years or 3 years. So the truth is, and people won't admit this, I'm not saying people lack diligence or commitment. I'm simply saying that it's hard to project yourself in building a brand at 3, 4, 5 years if at the back of your mind you're considering leaving your job in 18 months, 12 months, 6 months from today.
Yeah, and the average, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but the average tenure of a CMO at a large company is pretty short still, right?
Oh, it is indeed. I keep looking, and I won't name names, but I keep looking at CMOs being appointed and leaving companies, and it's high risk, hopefully high reward, but it's a very high risk position to be in. So really, to address your question specifically, the rule of thumb is to invest 60% in the brand and 40% in sales. To be clear, I understand and I encourage brands to move products. I get it. You want to drive traffic to your e-commerce platform, you want to drive footfall to your store, absolutely. But in order for you to do so, to generate a sustainable stream of business, that's where you have to be intentional, and that is where you have to build the brand. anyone can buy traffic. You and I can spend $500,000 and drive visitors to a website today and tomorrow. That's pretty easy to do. What's hard?
But they come and they leave.
Exactly, precisely. It's to develop this important relationship, customer lifetime value, so that people keep coming back and back again, spend more with you, and tell their friends and family about your product. That's what you need to encourage, so that you don't end up in that situation that's not sustainable and that is financially very high risk to simply buy traffic, bring people to the platform and not convert.
Yeah, and you talked about something really interesting in the marketing field, which is the transience of employees and of leadership. People often move from one company to the other. They didn't start the company in the first place, so they don't feel that sense of, I've got to stay here for the long run. If you translate that to the consumer side, that problem's even worse in terms of people being willing to switch from one brand to another. Do you think we're living in a time where brand loyalty even exists?
That's a great debate. And Byron Sharp from Ehrenberg Brass in Australia would argue that no, there is no such thing as loyalty. And my answer to
you
this,
agree with him?
Well, the word loyalty, maybe it's the word loyalty that bothers me. I think people can have emotional affinities with brands. I think few brands command loyalty, meaning few brands have a strong enough emotional bond with their audience so that people will come back and back again. The reality is, I think for most brands, people are not loyal to those brands. And that's why it is so important to work on what can the brand do for me. Let me clarify this. Too many brand strategists, too many brand managers are obsessed about the brand. And again, going back to Assemblage, the book, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation, is let's take a step back, remind ourselves that the consumer is the hero, not the brand. The brand is here to facilitate this process of transformation from who am I and who do I want to become. And I think as a brand strategist, as a brand manager, as an advertiser, as a marketer, if you understand this, and you position your brand so that it facilitates this transformation for people, you have a better shot at developing a strong emotional connection with your audience.
Whose responsibility ultimately do you think it is to craft that brand narrative?
It's the responsibility of the brand and its agency. I'm not pointing at a job title in particular, because job titles are misleading. And by the way, that's another thing that really doesn't matter to consumers. People reflect on Equinox Health Club deployed a new campaign in January by saying, oh, we don't do January at Equinox because we don't believe in New Year's resolution. And this campaign was all over the news. And that's to say that it doesn't matter if it's the CMO or the head of brand or who exactly at Equinox did that. It is the responsibility of all employees, all the associates at Equinox, to carry this message to the audience and to demonstrate this message to the audience.
One of the things you write in the book that is so true is that perception is truth. And when you think about brand perception, you're right. So much of it is formed not based on the marketing that people see, but on the experience that they have. And part of what I see you advocating for throughout the book, which is a major challenge for many companies, is alignment between the customer service, the customer experience, and the actual people doing the billboard ads at the same time. How does that happen in an organization? Is it just a cultural thing, as in the organization is flatter and so people talk to each other more? Is it something that can be mandated from the top? I mean, how do you get that to happen, particularly in a larger organization?
Yeah. In a larger traditional organization, it's harder because those organizations have to adapt from the old way of doing business, being siloed between offline and online and all that. In newer organizations, it's easier because they grew as omni-channel organizations, right? So to address your question specifically, it has to come from the top. It has to come from the top that we will deliver a unified message, and there has to be a financial incentive or should I say financial transparency, that everyone is in the same boat, meaning the goal is to convert prospects into loyal customers and generate sales no matter what channel the business, the revenue comes through. So that mandate has to come from the top, and it cannot be just a well-worded email. It has to translate into literally into people's compensation structure. Again, that's easier to do for the direct-to-consumer firms or the brands that came up over the last 5 years, because they grew as omni-channel brands to begin with. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to how people are compensated.
Yeah, one of the things you also wrote about is that citizens and brands are activists, and one of the things that made me think of was this desire and mandate for purpose. Do you feel like every brand needs to have a higher purpose in order to be successful?
That's a good question, and purpose has been a buzzword in the industry for 5, 7, maybe 9 years now. The short answer is no. I don't think that all brands need to have a higher purpose. However, we see in our studies at Ipsos, and I elaborate on this in the book, that consumers expect more for brand studies. They expect brands to make a positive impact on the economy, on the environment, on the world around them. So the short answer is it depends. Some brands are built around purpose. And I can think of a brand like, of course, Patagonia or National Geographic, right? Those brands are built around purpose. Other brands can adopt a purpose. It has to be authentic. It has to be genuine. And importantly, brands have to demonstrate this purpose and not just talk about it. But a success example here is, if I look at a big brand, I can think of Unilever, through Dove and their beauty project to reflect what real beauty is about. That's all to say that this project resonates with people, this purpose resonates with consumers, because it makes sense for Dove to promote what real beauty is about, as opposed to pictures that are overly photoshopped, if you will. So many brands, most brands, can adopt a purpose. Again, they have to be intentional about it. They have to be authentic, genuine about their intentions.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, when they do it well and when they're able to deliver on that, what have you seen the effects to be? And part of the reason why I'm asking is we mentioned early on that you've been working with Ipsos, which is a huge group that has a ton of data associated with the work that they do. And through the process of kind of doing the research for this book, you had access to all of this data, and you've been the kind of the driving force behind some of it as well. How much were you able to quantify some of the things that you think, or that I think as a marketer, right, are to be true, and actually say, look, I've got some data behind it here?
Yeah. 3 things come to mind reflecting on the work we've been doing at Ipsos around purpose. Number one, all things being equal, people are more likely to choose a brand that has a purpose. For example, sustainability. So that's because you have 150 SKUs of popcorn and toothpaste and soap on the shelf. So all things being equal, you're more likely as a consumer to go towards a brand that demonstrates a purpose. Number 2, we also see that people are willing to pay a premium for brands that demonstrate their purpose. Now, mind you, people are not going to pay twice the price. People are not going to pay double, okay? People will be willing to pay a reasonable premium. But if you tell your audience that you're doing the right thing for the local community, for the environment, that you're supporting farmers, that you're supporting an educational project, and so on and so forth, people will be willing to pay a premium. And the third part, we're going back to this emotional connection between the audience and the brand. And I'm very hesitant to use that word loyalty. As you said, people will switch very easily. That said, we see for sure that demonstrating a purpose is going to strengthen this emotional connection between the brand and the audience. So you really have two dimensions in this relationship between the brand and the consumer. One is the functional performance, and one is the brand desire. The brand desire is this emotional connection. Purpose definitely benefits, supports this dimension of brand desire, which in turn leads to a more loyal audience.
Mm. One of the ideas that you close the book with, which I think is a good segue into kind of closing out our conversation as well, is responsible consumerism and the rise of that. Is that something that really is taking over? And are people, like you said, they won't pay double necessarily, but they will pay a premium, not only for a brand that they believe in, but also maybe a brand that makes them feel like they're doing, quote unquote, the right thing, either for the environment or for social causes that they believe in. Is that what responsible consumerism means? And is that really going to be the driving force behind who we decide to buy from?
Yes, I think responsible consumerism is going to be perhaps the most important, one of the most important dimensions, driving forces for sure, of how we choose brands. So, Rohit, what you're alluding to, responsible consumerism, is to say that after years of overconsumption, we aim to buy more responsibly. We want to keep products longer. We want to give those products a second life instead of just disposing of those products. And it's counterintuitive, but there is an opportunity for brands to sell less and therefore make more money. That is, you no longer want to encourage fast fashion, whereby people will toss jeans and t-shirts every 6 months. You want to encourage people to recycle and upcycle those items. That is, to bring these items back to the store, to give them a second life, to sell them to someone else. That sounds very counterintuitive, but you're going to develop an emotional bond with the consumer, give them some store credits, and in turn build the basket and sell more items and or sell items with higher margins. So this imperative for responsible consumerism, and of course I give plenty of directions on how to implement this in the book. I think it's the challenge, but most importantly, the opportunity for brands for years to come.
That is an excellent place for us to finish. I have been talking with Dr. Emmanuel Probst. The book is called Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you to our listeners today. It's great connecting with you. I appreciate the opportunity.